Hi, BookTube, and welcome to a new video. This is a recent read, so 5 books. Ronald Sukenick, The Death of the Novel and Other Stories. Jeff Vandemeer, The City of Saints and Madmen, the first of his Ambergris trilogy. Canadian author W.D.Clarke, She Sang to Them, She Sang. And then 2 from the University of Calgary, which means I've read 3 Canadian authors in the last week or so. Wayne Arthurson, The Red Chesterfield. Wayne Arthurson is First Native Canadian. And some poetry by Braune, Dendrite Colonies. So I'm going to start with the Sukenick. Definitely a sort of late stage postmodernist American writer. I've read 3 of his books previously. This is very early. This is 1960s throughout the decade, because they're short stories, and I assume they were published in different publications, but they're all brought together here, and rather successfully, I feel, because they're all on a theme. They all inform one another, and that is his struggles to unite the world of reality, the rather banal world of the reality of a struggling writer, with that of his fiction, and how the two relate. And being the 60s, there's a lot of context here of university campus activism, anti-Vietnam War protests, draft protests, the sort of the hippie movement, things like that. That is the context for this. In some ways, he's immune to that, because he's a writer. He's in the grown-up world, and he's struggling. He doesn't have the luxury of being a student. And indeed, one of the stories was very interesting, because he goes back to, or the character in here goes back to his old student town 10 years after having left it. So everything is very, very recognisable. Physically and architecturally, it hasn't changed, but he's 10 years older. He's not a student. He's not in that lifestyle. He's had 10 years further experience and, trying to make his way through life. So he's got all these recognisable things from 10 years ago, which were sort of rather feather-bedded. And it all seems rather sort of almost persecutory to him now. But the main story is the death of the novel, the titular story, and it's by far the longest. It's about 60 pages, where the protagonist is sort of lectures at university on the death of the novel. And I'm just going to read you the first 2 paragraphs, because I think it offers an interesting idea to get your head around. Fiction constitutes a way of looking at the world. Therefore, I will begin by considering how the world looks in what I think we may now begin to call the contemporary post-realistic novel. Realistic fiction presupposed chronological time as the medium of a plotted narrative. An irreducible individual psyche is the subject of its characterisation, and, above all, the ultimate concrete reality of things as the object and rationale of its description. In the world of post-realism, however, all of these absolutes have become absolutely problematic. The contemporary writer, the writer who is acutely in touch with the life of which he is part, is forced to start from scratch. Reality doesn't exist, time doesn't exist, personality doesn't exist. God was the omniscient author, but he died. Now no one knows the plot, and since our reality lacks the sanction of a creator, there's no guarantee as to the authenticity of the received version. Time is reduced to presence, the content of a series of discontinuous moments. Time is no longer purposive, and so there is no destiny, only chance. Reality is simply our experience, and objectivity is, of course, an illusion. Personality, after passing through a phase of awkward self-consciousness, has become quite minimally a mere locus for our experience. In view of these annihilations, it should be no surprise that literature also does not exist. How could it? There is only reading and writing, which are things we do, like eating and making love, to pass the time, ways of maintaining a considered boredom in the face of the abyss. Okay, so apart from that last bit about there's no such thing as literature, I agree substantively with a lot of that, and I think it's a very good summary of sort of what, if postmodernism had any kind of sort of philosophy behind it, that was a very good mission statement of it, where of the classical 19th century novel, all the unities of time and character and reality have all melted away, the solidity. And this was in the 60s, you know, when all these things are being challenged in politics and culture. This is before fake news and the era of you know, sort of denying reality or whatever, of Putin and Trump and Boris Johnson and all of that. So I think that's a really powerful statement. I will say throughout this book, I mean, this is of its times, it's quite sexist, or it comes over as quite sexist. And in the title story, he is married, but he has a girlfriend and he has a mistress, and the girlfriend is 15 years old, so she's underage. So it's morally a bit, whoa, wait a minute here. But I think he resolves it rather brilliantly in that his wife, and I'll come back to her in a different story, his wife is a character in the short story, as is the writer, obviously, and they hold a discussion where he asks her if she minds that he's written about sex with other women and one of whom is underage. And it's a really interesting sort of, I'm not saying it's a metafiction because I don't know, you know, I don't assume that's true for one moment that he slept with an underage girl. But it's a really interesting sort of character within a character. And I think it does resolve the sexism, other than the fact that the similar attitudes towards the female sex are in every single story. But his wife is also sort of honoured, I think, because another one of the stories here is where he and it's called A Slice of Life, sorry, Roast Beef, A Slice of Life, where Sukenick is taping a conversation where they're preparing a Sunday lunch of a joint of beef, and he reproduces that conversation in full. And it's actually credited as a co-writing between he and his wife. And the wife character says, and again, is this actually for what was recorded on tape, or is this a gloss put on afterwards, like a commentary on the tape? But she through her mouth, says, this is the reverse of playwriting and for the theatre, where there you write first and then the words are enunciated by the actors. Here, they're enunciating in order to be able to write down a script, and she's comparing them, that even though this is a genuine conversation, supposedly, it's artifice, that they are actors, that they are playing a role, even though they are husband and wife, they're doing a very ordinary family thing and sitting down to eat a meal. It's still a notion of artifice because it's now been taken out of the dining room into a work of fiction. So I think there's a lot of really great stuff going on here. As I say, it will put some readers off because of its overt sexism. But I do think he grapples with that as well. So, yeah, this is fascinating. 5 stars. Now, on to Jeff Vandemeer's City of Saints and Madmen. This was my March of the Mammoths, even though it clocks in at 705 pages rather than the 800 that's taken to be a mammoth. But the reason for that is it's a trilogy. It's the first in a trilogy. I'm going to read the second before the end of March, which is this, Shriek and Afterword, and possibly go on to read the third. And I say possibly because I do not know what my reaction to this is. I do not know what to make of it. I definitely need to read this before I can pass any kind of judgment. So although on Goodreads I rated this 3 stars, that's sort of a placer mark. It could go up, it could go down, or it could stay the same. The reason I don't know what to make of this is because Vandemeer has created a fictional world called Ambergris, and does it really rather brilliantly in the sense of he's not info dumping, which is a fault of many people who are writing, you know, creating worlds. He does it through the structure of the different sections of the book, and props to him for that. It does have, the Ambergris has the feel of sort of 18th, 19th century, but there's also telefans, so it's kind of hard to place exactly when it is. So the first story in this is of a guy who sees the outline of a woman at a window in the town of Ambergris, falls in love with her, needs to try and make contact with her after he sort of walks away. And unfortunately for him, it's the time of Ambergris' great Mardi Gras or fete or whatever you call it, which is just always explodes into violence, and people are, you know, it's a brutal festival, and the body count is quite high. So he's trying to sort of track her down. And the problem is that it's preposterous that all he's done is seen an outline of a woman and fallen in love with it. And I don't want to give spoilers as to exactly how that plays out, but I never bought into that. The second section is a sort of introductory history into Ambergris, how it was formed and everything, which this is where I begin to have problems knowing quite how I feel about the book. It's very competently done, but it's not a very I don't find it very interesting. I find it recognisable, as I say, 18th, 19th century America or Britain, whatever you want to say, but with a bit of modern technology thrown in. It's almost steampunk in a way, which is a genre I really don't like. But the one really interesting thing is the what are called the grey caps, who are like mushroom people, who were the original denizens of this area before before Ambergris was colonised, and they had this beautiful architecture, very much reflecting back to Vandemeer's Southern Reach trilogy, of sort of flower, flora, growth, shaping all these fantastic sort of visual scapes and things. And of course, as part of the colonisation process, these grey caps, these mushroom folk, are, you know, sort of persecuted by the humans, but they have these weird and wondrous ways that the humans don't understand how they work, where partly they can infect them through the sort of fungal spores and basically sort of turn the humans into grey folk. But they don't seem to rely on that over much, except in one other story. Historically, there was this thing called the Silence, where for the annual great squid hunt, half the city of Ambergris goes out to sea to participate in the squid hunt, and when they come back, the other half of Ambergris' population has completely disappeared. There's no sign of them whatsoever, and they can only believe that they've been somehow whisked away by the grey caps, the mushroom people. So there's this uneasy tension between these two races of people in Ambergris. So overall, I didn't find the history that engaging. It's sort of piracy and colonisation, but I did find the mushroom folk very, you know, absolutely fascinating. As I say, it definitely had echoes with the Southern Reach trilogy. The third section is of an artist called, I think, Matt Lake, Matt as in Matthew Lake, who is just sort of a jobbing artist. He's uninspired, he takes paid commissions, and then he sort of is forced into a moral dilemma, horrific moral dilemma, where sort of on pain of death kind of thing. And after that experience, it's changed his whole aesthetic. He's now a sort of master artist because he's found his mojo. He's done a deal with the devil. He's done what Robert Johnson did, even though he was very reluctant to be forced into this moral choice. But you know, he's found his muse really, which is a sort of macabre, bathed in blood kind of muse. And yeah, okay. I mean, we've seen that story done before. Is it that interesting where artists find their inspiration? I'm not sure. I'm in two minds. And the fourth story is the most, I think, the key to this book, and the bit I enjoyed the most, the bit that makes me think that there is great potential in this series if the trilogy decides to go down that line. So it's called The Strange Case of X. X is an author who's wound up in a sanatorium, a mental asylum, in Ambergris, and he's been assessed by loads and loads of psychologists, and this is the latest in the line of psychologists. One of his problems is that he believes that Ambergris is his fictional creation, even though this is set in the world of Ambergris, where an Ambergris psychologist is analysing him. So straight away there's that sort of inverted tension, which again has sort of been done by Christopher Priest in The Affirmation, which is a book I would recommend to anyone. There, he talks about other texts by other authors, and it's sort of implied either that he's the author of all these texts, that he's almost like sort of got all these ulterior, these other personalities that are creating these works, or that they're also in an asylum, that all these mad writers are in this same asylum. And it's teetering backwards and forwards as to what the reality is. Is Ambergris a real thing? And he's a writer really from our world, our recognisable world, who's having these delusions, or is he in fact right? And the whole of Ambergris is a product of his creative imagination. And I think that's a delicious tension within that. he sees, he claims that, before he ended up in the asylum, that the cause of the breakdowns, he started to see these props that he'd put in his world of Ambergris, he started to see them in his real life. And the Ambergris psychologists go, well, no, that's because they exist in Ambergris. Why wouldn't you see them? So I just thought that was really, really well done. Then after that story, we get a load of appendices, which are some of the texts that are mentioned in The Strange Case of X. And we get things like a fake bibliography. We get things like, we get a glossary, like all these techniques you've seen done before. And this is the problem I had. If the book is about writing and, creating things from your imagination and then being stuck in them, if it's about the sort of schizophrenia of having to inhabit many, many different points of view, in this case of all the other writers, creating their takes on Ambergris, I can get with that totally, absolutely. But then I think, well, why do we need so much detail on the rest of Ambergris, like the squid hunt or... a plague of mushroom spores. Why do we need any of that? Yes, he needs to set up a separate, completely detached world, different to our world, but I was far less interested in the detail of that. Whereas if we go on in books 2 and 3 to this is Ambergris, here's some more of its lore and more of its sort of events, I'm far less interested in that. So at the moment, I give this 3 stars, but it could go either way. And on to W.D.Clarke, She Sang to Them, She Sang. Full disclosure, this was sent to me by the author, and it's on the same impress, Corona Samizdat, which have published my latest book. So just so you know, I didn't know W.D.Clarke before he sent me this. He approached me via email. I was happy to take a look. We've since started talking over Twitter as I talked to him about this book. So this is very much a novel of characters, a character study, and there are basically 3 characters under the microscope here. So we have Jay and Jay and Katie, who are a married couple, young, still very much in the flush of love. They have a 2-year-old daughter. And Jay is a surfer, a bit of a beach bum. He doesn't really work. He gets lots of manias. So currently it's trampolining, and then it'll move on to something else. Katie is a very idealistic teacher. She wants to make her sort of teaching very student-led and sort of comes up with all these sort of notions that she wants to turn into like a set of theories or a lecture on how teaching should be revolutionised. And they want to move house. They want to actually travel around the world for 6 months with the baby, with the 2-year-old. So they want to buy a house, rent it out while they travel, and then come back and settle down. And the agent is a woman called Jo, who's in her 40s. She owns what do you call the reality company? I'm not sure what Americans call it, what we call estate agents in the UK. And her main salesman is a guy called Manny Bedrosian of Armenian extract. So the 3 characters whose point of views we get are Katie's, Manny's and Jo's. And they all offer us their interiority through, I guess you'd call it stream of consciousness, but I don't want you to be put off by that. It's not an overpowering stream of consciousness. So on the one hand, you'll get something like Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf, where you're sort of moving, quite rapidly at times from consciousness to consciousness, consciousness. Equally, it's not a monologue. These are 3, highly defined characters, each with their own points of view. So I think the stream of consciousness, if that's what you want to call it, or interior monologue, works really well because it's across 3 characters. You're not stuck inside the head of one throughout the book. So I think that's a definite, strength of this book. You get 3 genuine characters, 3 genuine points of view. Now, it has to be said that Manny and Jo are both quite angry characters, and they are much more entertaining than Katie, who is an idealist. She has all these she's still in the throes of love, but it's an unrealistic, it's an idealised love. She has this idealised version of teaching and kids and all of that. So it's much more interesting, I think, to be in the heads of Jo and Manny in their respective chapters. And, they are going to come a cropper because of their sort of self-entitlement. and their anger. And I'm not going to spoil how, but it's very funny, it's very entertaining. Katie, she will probably come a cropper too. Again, it's a bit hard talking about this without spoilers, but it's not as obvious as, you know, whether that will happen or how it will happen as of these two others. So I just thought this was really entertaining, highly literary, lots of wordplay, lots of sort of allusions, both musical and literary. It is also a critique of capitalism. It is all about the buying and selling of homes, and how through sheer luck of timing your house will go up massively in price, or you get to negative equity. It's very much sort of looking at a house as an investment instead of as a place to live. So it does deal with those themes as well. It does deal with the sort of the early 21st century capitalism of the Great Crash and things like that as well. So I enjoyed this. I gave this 4.5 stars. And onto the two books, both through the University of Calgary Press. This is Wayne Arthurson, The Red Chesterfield. This is despite a slightly dark subject matter, this was highly whimsical, and I don't normally like whimsy. The Third Policeman I just couldn't get on with, and a book by what's-his-face Matthews, the Aleppo author, I wish I could remember the name of the book, I also hated. The reason I hated those is because from chapter to chapter to chapter, apart from the main character, there seemed to be no link to what had gone on before. It was all sort of a series of random, dissonant incidents being described, and I just didn't get on with them at all. Here, there is a through flow, and I think that's why it worked for me. So the main character is one of three brothers. He has a job as a local bylaw enforcer, so things like sort of how you put your trash out, not letting weeds, sort of invasive weeds and sort of grow in your garden. So he's very much at a very low level, I'd say bylaw, not sort of criminal law. And one day he sees a red Chesterfield, which is like a sofa, sort of thrown out on the side of the road, which obviously pricks his professional interest. He's very complimentary about the red Chesterfield, how superior it is to other sorts of sofas. But when he goes behind to take a look and sees that it's slashed, he discovers a severed human foot in it. So all of a sudden, this bylaw infraction has escalated to a criminal murder, or likely murder anyway. And he's interviewed by the police. It's, as I say, it's escalated. And then his brother, who has political ambitions, and this is a bit of a spoiler, there's no real way around it, he escalates it from an individual human-on-human crime to a mass crime, because he is basically guilty of ballot stuffing, of creating ghost voters who don't exist in order for him to win the vote. And so that's somehow a big, although it's a sort of victimless crime, it's a crime against society, because it's perverting the nature of democracy. And there's lots of sort of wacky, offbeat stuff going on here, which I really enjoyed. The chapters are very short, they're basically a page long. It's only 96 pages, it's a really quick read, but highly enjoyable. I saw Fraser over at Springboard Thought first bring this to my attention. He liked it, I liked it as well. 5 stars. And on to some poetry finally. This is Sean Braune, Dendrite, Balconies. He says in his sort of afterword little essay that we are so overwhelmed by the text, words, writing, text in a digital world, that it's almost like a cacophony. If you think about online and the sort of voices shouting at each other and stuff, that it's impossible actually to pick out anything from the text. And although there's a bit of sort of incorporated stuff from Time magazine, Cosmopolitan, and from billboards, this is very much a delightful bombardment of words. There were so many words I became reacquainted with that I really liked. So like stockade was a word. Don't go looking necessarily for meaning in every stanza here, because you won't find it. Some of it is just the sound and the combination, the assonance, the alliteration. I just loved it. So I'm just going to give you some examples. Temptation tickles crystal as vanity acquires words. Two humans on a park bench, pulling feathers from their hair, pose like a frieze at the moment of puling viscosity. I love that. Pose like a frieze at the moment of puling viscosity. What does it mean? I have no idea. I don't care. I loved it. Cadences are material, random paradises of indignity, of choler. They are the salt wedge speckling childhood anger. Now there are standards where it does get a bit more, you can zero a bit more into the sort of the poet, his interiority, his emotionality, but a lot of it is just these word concatenations, which I really, really just absolutely basked in. 5 stars. And as to what I'm currently reading, I'm reading this, The New Life by Tom Crew, historical fiction. And as I say, next up probably would be the second in their Vandemeer trilogy, Shriek and Afterword, which is the book, when I heard Matthew Sciarappa talk about it in his best reads of last year, was the one that made me want to read more than anything. But I felt that I needed to get the world of Ambergris first before I could then read this, and that's how it's turned out. So there you have it. 5 books read, just very quickly. Ronald Sukenick, 5 stars. Sorry, the death of the novel and other stories, 5 stars. A bit of a sort of wait and see grade on Jeff Vandemeer's City of Saints and Madmen. She Sang to Them, She Sang by W.D.Clarke, 4.5 stars, and then 2 5-star reads, The Red Chesterfield by Wayne Arthurson, and Dendrite Balconies by Sean Braune, which is poetry. Okay, BookTube, so thanks very much, till next time.